There we go. We are absolutely live. Thank you to everybody who is going to join us today. We'll just give everybody 20 seconds to get online before we kick in, and then we'll start our discussion today. So I am very, very honoured today to be joined by three fantastic minds, Shabri, Lakhani, Georgina, Aspden and Neil Clark. We'll do some intros in just a moment, but just to set the scene for our discussion today, here at AIR we're doing a 12-month content series where each month we focus on a particular area that you may have to overcome if you were building an in-house SDR team or sales team for the first time, or indeed looking to reinvent a failing team. And as part of that, each month we have a live event just like today, and we invite, myself and Neil invite on one or two external guests that live in this world, that bring a different view, a different perspective, and an expertise to the table on the particular area that we're talking about. Last month, we talked about what do you need to do before you go live, the planning phase of it. What do you need to think about? Is it right for you to set up an internal sales team, SDRs and AEs, or just SDRs or just AEs? Should be looking at 360. What about your first sales hire? How long do you need to plan? Getting stakeholder buy-in, all those sorts of things. And we were joined by the fantastic Greg Freeman today. I'm joined by Shabri, Georgina and Neil, and we are going to be discussing onboarding, particularly SDRs. I think we'll get into other roles, I'm sure, but with a focus on the onboarding process for SDRs, a process where I think you make or break the next 12 months very, very quickly if you get it right or get it wrong. So firstly, thank you for joining us. What I'll do before we get into the discussion is we'll just go round, and for those of you that don't know, Neil, Georgina, Shabri, I'll just give everybody a quick minute to talk about themselves, their organisation and their role within that organisation, and maybe the perspective that they bring to this discussion. Georgina, perhaps I could invite you to come on first. If you wouldn't mind just giving us a quick 60 seconds, who's Georgina and who's Perkbox?
Absolutely. So obviously I'm Georgina. I'm the SDR manager at Perkbox. Perkbox is an employee experience platform. So we work with HR professionals, helping them to support employee wellbeing and helping them attract, retain and engage their top talent. So obviously quite after the last 12 months, a very important topic, but actually it's a very important time in our growth. So that means, we're growing our SDR team. So I've recently onboarded 9 new SDRs. Some of them have come from air marketing as well. And it's been an interesting ride. We've had the last 12 months having to adapt to working remotely, and our onboarding kind of plan has had to be adapted, changed, and there's been a lot of learnings along the way. So really looking forward to this discussion today.
Thank you very much. Great to have you here. Shabri.
Hi, thank you very much for having me, Owen. So by way of introduction, my name is Shabri, CEO of SalesWorks. We work with organizations to help them build and optimize their SDR teams. So we do that through training and consulting. So a big part of our training business is actually helping companies onboard. Prior to SalesWorks, I led the SDR team for Finastra. So I grew the team there from 3 to 50. Number of iterations on onboarding, so happy to talk through today some of my learnings, but this is a topic I'm incredibly passionate about. I think I've probably onboarded 200 SDRs or something in the last 10 years. So lots of mistakes I've made, but also lots of things that we're working with companies now to help implement. So really excited to be alongside Georgina and Neil today. So thanks for having me.
Thank you. Love that. So if we have a difference of opinion, we have to bow down to your greater knowledge of 200 times. You've got to have learnt something in that experience. Neil, quick 60 seconds from you, if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah, well, after that, huge imposter syndrome for this. I'm the commercial director at AIR, working across our sales and account management. AIR provides outsourced SDRs and demand generation in whichever kind of form or flavor that looks like. So we work with an awful lot of clients looking to build that. So yeah, just really keen to learn as well as contribute and listen today.
Fantastic. Well, there we go. We've set the scene. Hopefully between the four of us, we we can agree we know a little bit of something around onboarding SDR and what works and what doesn't. So it'd be interesting to see the diversity and the variety of experience and opinions on that throughout the day. So let's get kicked in. If you're watching this and you want to say hello, there's a comment section on the right hand side. By all means, fire in questions there. And as we're running through the discussion, I'll try and seed those questions in if they're relevant to the topic we're on at the time. I want to start with a really simple question. And Georgina, I'm going to come to you first to get your take, if that's all right. So sorry to throw you under the bus and be the first in, but let's do it. How many SDRs can you onboard successfully in one go? How many is too many? And what's ideal?
I mean, it's a question I feel like I still don't know the answer to fully, but it's something that we're kind of learning. I think the challenge really with a big group of SDRs is that everybody learns differently. Everybody has a different learning style. And I think that's the biggest challenge. If you want to onboard a big group at once, you're not going to be able to have everybody in the same sessions learning in the same way. So I think regardless of how many people you have in those sessions, the first thing you need to establish is, what is everybody's learning style? Are they visual learners? Do they like to just listen? Do they like to be involved in things hands-on? And I think that's been our biggest kind of takeaway. We recently onboarded 5 SDRs at once. And I think that was a good group in that there was a kind of cohort of people learning together. And I think there's kind of this, we're in this together kind of attitude of a group of that size. But I think if there was any more than that, it would have been a massive challenge because, everybody does learn differently and everybody picks things up at different paces depending on their experience. So I don't know what the answer is to that question, to be perfectly honest, but I think the 5 that we had was a really good number. I'd be very conscious of having more than that in one go, really.
Look, already great insight. It's great that none of us know, but the fact is that we've already learned that probably 5, bigger than 5, is going to be hard to do, and the consistency of experience is a really interesting point there. Shabri, what's your take on that?
I think the point that Georgina made, she used a word called cohort, which I love, right? Because I think there's some economies of scale as you bring these cohorts in. So I think if you are doing a remote onboarding experience where it's a blend of, self-paced learning and sort of learning sessions with other people in the business, I think 5 is probably the right number. I think if you're in a position where you can do bootcamp style onboarding, so you do 2 weeks of, really consolidated, pretty intense learning. I've done bootcamps before with 20 people. So I think it just depends. And I think, Georgina, your point around different learning styles is a good one. So I think that looking at, where are people now and what do we need to do to get them productive sort of at the end of month 1. But I think it actually depends on the environment of which you are onboarding. So is it remote or is it in person? And are you able to actually do a 2-week intense boot camp, which is something that I've done before, but it's a lot of heavy lifting. So again, it depends on the size of organization and the size of and actually the ability to leverage other people in the organization to help deliver that. So it's not all on your shoulders.
Yeah, it's an interesting point. Neil, I'll come to you on this. I guess one of the factors for an SDR manager or somebody who's going to be the lead is getting them in, getting them up and running. One of the factors for the commercial side of the business is actually, what does it cost? How much work? How much resource are we pulling from other areas of the business? What's your take on that? Because I'm guessing you're going to want to expose SDRs to lots of people and drain time in. Is that a factor in the consideration of how many you bring in one go?
Yeah, I think Shabri's last points about the size of organisation. It's how big is the SDR team that they're coming into? Because some of the onboarding will be a one-to-many. You'll be able to actually deliver that training in a group, but a lot of it you'll want to do on a one-to-one basis. Now that could be a peer-to-peer, using that time, listening, supporting. And I think that's the bit resource-wise, what resource sits in the organization already to onboard 5. That might be 5 brand new, that might be doubling, or it might just actually be a small proportion which can sort of blend in. That to me is the key question on cost, and are they scaling or replacing as far as why they're coming in, how they're coming in, what you can do with your kind of getting everything set up, so the sales ops, what resource do you need from a sales ops point of view to get all of those kind of SDRs set up?
Okay, let's look at day one. Shabri, what does your day one look like?
So it's a good question. It's a really good question. I think day one is all about expectation setting, right? And a lot of people think that onboarding is the end of SDR training. My view is that it's the start of SDR training. So what are your expectations? A lot of companies have got a long time in between offer and onboarding, in which case, you've got to sort of revisit what the role is, what the expectations are, what does good look like, and break down goals that you're looking at to measure success. So I think, day one is about the vision and things like that. And I like to take it as an opportunity to sort of walk through vision, walk through culture, walk through mission, and then set the scene for the week or 2 weeks ahead. And, I think sort of, apart from that, I think I see a lot of companies then dive straight into product. And this is like, it's my bugbear. And they kind of go into, this is our product, this is what we do, and all of this sort of stuff. And actually, I think it's really, really important to start with industry. Really important to start with industry. So, for SalesWorks, as an example, we've got a new hire joining next week. Their onboarding is going to be around what's the makeup of a SaaS sales team? What's the role of a VP of sales? What's an SDR measured on? What's an AE measured on? And, Georgina, I imagine for Perkbox, selling to HR and that type of world, just like, what is the day in the life of an HR manager, right? And I think that then just allows you to have a much more value-based conversation. So I think maybe that doesn't fit in day one, maybe that fits in day 2 or day 3, but actually that should be the next thing, in my opinion, of what you go into.
I love that, because actually all the product knowledge and no context makes for a very empty conversation, doesn't it? And I think that when we talk about relevancy in sales, it's that context that allows you to connect to the relativity and find what's relative to your buyer. Georgina, what are the types of things that you do on day one? What are your goals that you're trying to tick off in the first day?
Yeah, I mean, to Shabri's point, I completely agree. I think day one is all about expectation setting, but we actually try and start our onboarding before day one. Like, there are so many steps that we take before that to make, the new hires feel comfortable. So, feeling integrated with the culture, we always try and send, a little welcome pack to their houses before they start, with kind of merchandise and branded notepads and stuff like that, just to make them feel part of the culture before they start. And then we always try and send a kind of welcome email before day one, so they know exactly where they're expected, at what time, and to kind of ease those nerves, because a lot of the people that we hire into SDR roles are often straight out of university. It may be their first, role in a professional environment. It can be quite daunting. So pre-day one, we try and do a lot to kind of ease that. But I think Shabri's absolutely right. What we do is, set those expectations. So what are your goals for kind of week one, month one, year one? What's the kind of onboarding process going to look like? And then we go into kind of the history of Perkbox, the mission, the vision, the culture. And we tend to look at how sort of the SDR role fits into the business. So what is the role of an SDR? What is the role of an AE? What do all the different teams actually mean, and how do they fit together? So that's kind of what we tend to look at in day one. And obviously meeting the team, it's really important that we do that straight away, really. So that's kind of the first hour of the day is kind of spent chatting with the team and just getting to know each other, particularly over Zoom. It's important to know who you can reach out to and what your network looks like straight away, I think.
Yeah, of course, that's changed, right? So you can't walk them around the office and introduce them to everybody now. It's a very different world. I've got a view that the first day, for me, if it's successful, it's them walking home happy and comfortable in their new environment. So, to an extent, the training you do on first day, I'd imagine it's a bit like being a deer in headlights. The adrenaline's up, the nerves have kicked in. You're probably not at your optimum when it comes to absorbing information and learning. And I've had 4 people introduce me, and by the time I get to the third one, I've forgotten the first one's names. There's a lot to take in. I don't know what your thoughts are around that, but for me, it's like, if they come there, they enjoy the day, they feel more comfortable in their environment than they did when they started the day, and they go home excited about day 2. You can kind of go, that was a successful day. Anything above that, to a degree, is a bonus, right?
Yeah, I completely agree. And I joined Air last year, so have done some onboarding recently myself. It feels like it's all about, for me, I just wrote down, it's all about the why, which we can easily skip, or it's tempting to skip it because we're immersed in it and drop into the detail so quickly. And if you can just hold out, 1 day in the grand scheme of things is a very short period of time, just to get the why do we do what we do, and just bring that in, because it's very difficult to impart that. As soon as we get into the what and how, it starts to become that a little bit more daunting, like you say, and it all becomes about, how am I going to hit my quota? How am I going to get to that point? I think that's really key. We'll skip on to that. And I just wrote down, not 8 hours of product training. That's one way to totally screw it up.
Right, good. We're agreeing on something. So that's a really good start on the conversation. I love it. So I'm going to throw a spanner in the works on something. And I know, I'll say this out loud, I know some of you will disagree with me on this point. When I started out as an SDR, which in those days wasn't called an SDR, let's be fair, it was a sales rep at best, I think, from a title perspective. I personally wanted, on my first day, to get that first phone call done. I wanted to pick up the phone and talk to a customer, talk to somebody, go and do some work, because there's nothing worse for me on my first day feeling like I've added no value, I've not brought anything to the table, and that I'm still carrying that nerve of what it looks like and what it feels like to do the actual job. So I've always, and this is very much built around my personality and what was comfortable for me and right for me, I was hungry to do that on my first day. And I remember being in an induction that wasn't designed, but I wasn't leaving the office until I'd done that. Didn't care if I didn't speak to anybody, but I was going to make a few phone calls, current customers, past customers, whatever. And I know what I'm going to say to them. It's my first day. I'm going to caveat it. I'm not going to worry about needing to pretend like I'm an expert. Now, most people I speak to strongly disagree with that, because their take is they're representing a brand. It's too early, too much pressure. What do you say if an SDR came in with that attitude? Would you, maybe we wouldn't build it into our plan, but would you embrace that? Or would you say, nah, you're not ready, don't go? Neil, I'll come to you first, Neil, because you've gone last on the last couple. What are your thoughts?
My initial thoughts are that we've got so much tech and sequencing and things now in place from when we started doing that. The phone was the primary, that was the bit that was judged on. So we're now pulling data sets, licenses, all of the tech stack that comes with that. That person coming in, I'd absolutely embrace, but potentially it wouldn't be possible. You're not going to be set up on that. I think that would be really refreshing, and someone kind of saying, let me at them, I can do that. And I've got a couple of bits that just, it's saying about attitude, drive, style. I think we can get too hung up on the perfect call, and it's about desire and want. It's reining it in a tad, but with that, because you want someone to walk in every day thinking, I can't wait to get that first call under my belt. And if you've got it, you can't constrain that, or you shouldn't try and constrain it. I think you'd probably try and get through a couple of days induction though first.
I mean, I get the tech license thing, but they've got a phone and you've got people they can call. So, I'm gonna keep hammering this back. Shabri, what are your thoughts on that?
I agree with Neil that I think that drive would be a reminder of why I hired that person, right? I think, Owen, similar to when you started as an SDR, when I started as an SDR, it was a phone and a list, right? So it was very easy for me to pick up the phone and, say, hi, this is Shabri from MySales. I think this is very, very different now, where we are in a much more crowded marketplace. Like, it is so competitive and we have to cut through the noise. And, there's that well-known stat that buyers have done 70% of their research by the time they come to us. So I think that's a big differentiator now. And I think the other thing is, there is often a naivety with, I hate this word, but I'm going to use it, millennials, because I probably fall into the bracket. In fact, I think I do fall into the bracket of a millennial, but like there is often a naivety of people who are very early on in their career thinking, oh, well, you know, I just need to book a meeting. How hard can it be? I'm great at this and, you know, I'm going to do well. And actually there is so many elements to a cold call, as we all know, that you need to get right. Everything from your call opening to the pitch of your voice to the color in your voice to the a need to actively listen to closing for commitment. There is so much. So I think that drive is often underpinned by a slight naivety of how hard it is. And I think that I'd actually probably give someone the opportunity. If I had a friendly client, I'd say, yeah, go on and give them a call. Because actually, I think, we talk about failing hard, failing fast. Like, I would like them to sort of experience actually how difficult it is. So they then recognize the importance of onboarding and paying attention and absorbing as much information as they can. But maybe that's a bit cool of me. So I'll see how.
Careful what you ask for, right? Do you know it's interesting. Georgina, before I come to you, my take is just having conversation, making calls. The type of call it is, I think, is probably less important. It's about getting in and having a conversation. And often you can learn more from a client that stopped working with that company or hasn't chosen to work yet or already works than a cold call. And you're more likely to get a hold of them. So I think it's more about the act of doing it and the experience than it is about like you say, the outcome. Interesting to know that you give them a chance to hang themselves. I'm a friendly call. There you go. But do you know what? I was naive at 22 or whatever I was at the time, and I'll take that. But I think it's that whole thing of, like you say, if you see that attitude in somebody, great. Let's embrace it to a degree, but protect them to another degree. But I'm enjoying this conversation so far. Georgina, what's your take on that? What would you do in that scenario?
Yeah, I mean, I'd have to agree with Shabri. I think, it is fantastic. And of course, you want somebody who's got that drive and that motivation. But I think there's so much to learn before you do that. And to Neil's point, from all the tech stack we use, particularly at the moment, remotely, we wouldn't be ready to do that on day one anyway. But I think there are some things you can kind of do to get around that. What we try and do in week one is get SDRs sat on live AE demos with our prospects and getting them involved in kind of the live meetings, because I think that's a way of, being absorbed into the kind of real world of selling at Perkbox, but without having to, get on the phones before you're kind of ready. And we find that's a really good way, because you're understanding the messaging, you're hearing the messaging, you're getting a taste for what the product is and how we sell. But you're still learning in the process. So that's kind of how we get around it. But I think there's definitely some learning to do before that. It's, of course, important to embrace it, though.
Okay, cool. So when are we comfortable? When's the right time for somebody to start? I'm not talking about sitting with the phone and starting to send emails out all day, but when they start to do that first piece where they might do an hour and then check in and you review it with them. When is too long to wait to start to do that for an SDR experience? Shabri, what was your thoughts on that?
I think if you've given the right training in the first 2 weeks, I think it's really reasonable to expect someone to be on the phone at some point in week 3, at a push week 4. And I think it's the type of leads that you give them and the type of calls that you give them exposure to is important. So what I've typically done before is given them some easier leads, so webinar attendees, white paper download leads, sort of those lower intent MQLs. I think outbound is probably, it's not a stretch, but I think giving them some exposure to something that is a little bit warm, I think is reasonable.
Georgina, are you going upwards or downwards on 3rd week?
So ours is a slightly shorter timeline. I think typically the way we've seen it kind of works is we have a 2-week onboarding program. And I think, to your point earlier, it's really important that that's kind of the start of the training. So it's not kind of 2 weeks and that's it. Here you go. Here are your leads, get on with it. But I think, at the end of week 2, generally we find that our SDRs are kind of ready to start making those calls and start, putting that knowledge into practice. But I completely agree with Shabri. I think it's important to kind of give some slightly warmer leads, and also help with conversations. You know, if you've got kind of warmer inbound leads you can give to your SDRs, they're more likely to have those conversations and learn quicker. So that's what we tend to do as well. But I think, you know, generally speaking, it's kind of week 2, but it depends on experience, right? You know, if you have somebody who's been an SDR for a year and a half before at another business, you know, can hit the ground running, then it's a slightly different situation. But generally, yeah, we try and get that kind of 2 weeks of foundational knowledge down before they start on the phones.
Neil, we've gone from week 3 to week 2. You carrying on the journey? What's your ideal?
I think I am. I think probably I'd go for a reasonably modular onboarding, so that it wasn't necessarily cast. And if someone's right, has had experience, is clearly smashing through all of the kind of mock calls and training and those kind of it, you know, if it's right. I was going to sort of say probably start of week 2, perfect world. If it needs to be longer, it can be longer. And yeah, I think I'm pulling it even. I'm putting myself in that position and thinking I would be itching by the end of the first week to start making some calls. And I get it, but yeah, I think I'd probably be pulling that forward a little bit.
I've seen this debate a lot, and one of the things I think people interpret that making your first live calls means that that's it. And Shabri, to your point of view, they're left alone. You're now working and you're off and running. I think you know, there's we'll talk about some metrics. Shabri's highlighted one on LinkedIn this morning about the percentage of information that's absorbed and carried out of onboarding into the actual real life. We all know that the best way to learn anything is to do something. Now, you need a certain level of something before you do, because otherwise, you know, I'm not going to go and start, you know, training crocodiles tomorrow because I've got no idea what I'm doing. I need a base level of training, but at some point, I've got to get in there. I've got to do it to know what it feels like, and I will learn so much faster by doing. Now, that doesn't mean I'm going to go and be in there for hours and hours and I'm with no one supporting me. Because I go in, I do it once, I see what it feels like, and then I check back. And I discuss and I review and I feedback and I learn, and then I go and do it again. And I think, yeah, my view is the sooner the better. And if I started on a Monday, I would hate to go home on a Friday not having made some calls, not having done it. I'm not talking about hundreds. I'm talking about 10 calls, 5 calls. Speak to 5 people. Let's see what that feels like. I can talk away the fact that I don't know everything. I'm in my first week. I can explain that to people, and I think humans are pretty understanding and supportive in that scenario. But I now have got the opportunity to learn from live experience and apply that back into the training that I have the following week, in week 2 or week 3 and week 4. And instead of having to imagine what's that like, I can actually draw on my personal experiences, and that learning accelerates throughout. And this is why I think that blended approach, and Shabri, your first point for me was the most important thing here. This isn't an onboarding process with a start and a finish. This is an ongoing process that keeps going into month 2, month 3, month 4 and beyond. But for me, I really feel like getting in and having a conversation with a prospect as early as you can realistically have it is a very, very healthy thing to do. But I know that a lot of people disagree with me, particularly HR people, because of course they got a very different view. So let's look at the ramp time. So Shabri, I'm going to come to you because I know your exposure to training and developing SDRs and 200 people being onboarded is going to have a very good view on this. What's your experience of the fastest ramp time that's possible and the longest before you say this person isn't getting it?
Good question. And so I sort of don't think there's a right answer, but I'll give my take on it. So I think average ramp time is 3 months. And I think anyone who tells you it's 1 week doesn't understand what ramp actually means. And I spoke to an SDR leader a couple of months ago, and he said to me, our SDRs are fully ramped within 2 weeks. And I was like, okay, so we're just on a different page here about what ramp means. I think using the first 3 months, I treat it as an extended interview process as well, right? Because they've also got to be the right fit for the role. And if you're hiring SDRs straight out of education who haven't done the role before, you'll often find that people are like, I just actually don't like this and I don't want to do it anymore. And that's okay. So I'd say using that first 3 months to look at, are they enjoying it? Are they good at it? And are they a fit for the team and our culture as a business? I think within that first 3 months, you'll also start to identify any red flags. I like to do something called the 9-box model in those first 3 months. So if you're not familiar with the 9-box model, you have performance on the x-axis and potential on the y-axis. So your performance is your achievements, and your competencies, and your performance is your motivation, your drive. And the goal is to, people should be, looking at how can they progress through the potential, but also what are you doing to set different metrics through that ramp period and progress them through that performance. And actually, we tend to focus on the people in the top right-hand box, so your high performance and high potential, and actually we neglect the people that are in the middle and the bottom of that box. So I think that's a really good tool to use in the first 3 months. And I would say after 3 months, people should be carrying a full quota.
Love that. Georgina, one of the things I love the fact you're on this conversation is that I know that you're the most recent of all of us to be an SDR, and you've done that progression into SDR manager. So it won't be, Neil and I, certainly, it'll be dinosaur years since we sat and we were onboarded as an SDR. So for you, when you think back to your onboarding as an SDR within Perkbox or in any roles before that, do you look back and can you pinpoint any things that you think, I wish I'd have had that, or I wish it had changed that way, or I had too much of that and I remember that taking way too long and being, having a lack of, not being as engaging as I would like? Have you got some sort of first-hand experience of that, mate?
It's a good question. I think, from my onboarding experience at Perkbox, I was, like you, Owen, in your previous role, was just super keen to get going. I've been an SDR before, and I was just super keen to, make my own calls, build my own pipeline, book my own meetings, and just get on with it. But I think I missed opportunity there because, listening into AE meetings for me was one of the biggest learnings, but I think because I was so focused on my own role, I didn't do that enough, and that meant that the AE relationships weren't perhaps as strong as they should be initially. But I think back to kind of Shabri's point about that kind of 3-month ramp period, I think that's kind of what we see, and we ramp our targets for that, so that after 3 months you're kind of on a full quota. But it's really important to kind of set expectations throughout that. I think, when you come into an SDR role, particularly if it's your first role out of education, looking at that kind of quota target is really overwhelming. And I think it's really important to set expectations around the activities and the inputs that help you get there, because I think if you don't do that, it can be really easy to be like, actually, I'm not very good at this, I don't enjoy it, when actually you just need that time. So I think it's really important to set those expectations, and I think that's something that when I was an SDR, I was focused so much on that. I haven't got my target of qualified meetings, when actually, I was booking in the initial discovery calls and I was having those conversations. I just wasn't there yet. So I think that's key, really, and setting those targets for yourselves and having your manager set those targets is really important in those first few months.
What's interesting as well about ramp, and Shabri, you may have seen this, Neil, I know you have, because we see it within our organisation, is that you do get people who go, 50% of target, 75%, 80%, 90%, and then 100% across those 4 months. But you also get people who go 20%, 30%, month 1, same again in month 2, month 3, 50%, and then month 4, 5, or 6, they just nail it. They just get it. And it's a much slower ramp. But quite often, and our data tells us that those people actually quite often are the people that end up being the top performers. They ramp slower, but they end up being the top performer long term or medium term, which I think is fascinating. I don't know what that is, but maybe it's people who take a little bit longer to get their head around things because they like to absorb more information, and therefore once they get to that critical point of knowing enough, they hit the ground and they run really quickly. I think, I don't know, it's something fascinating about that. That's fantastic. And let's just move on to you touched on something, Georgina, around other departments. So what are the other departments that we should be exposed to as an SDR in our onboarding process?
So I think marketing is obviously a really, really important one. What we always try and do is have introductions from the heads of departments during that onboarding process. So we have kind of an introduction to marketing delivered by our marketing director. RevOps is exactly the same. Understanding the key stakeholders in those teams is really, really important, because, to be a successful SDR, you need to work with those teams really effectively. And also the A's, we have 3 kind of AE teams. We have our SME, mid-market, and our corporate teams, and understanding, even if you don't work, in a one-on-one relationship with those teams, you need to know who all of those individuals are. So yeah, I think marketing and RevOps for us are the kind of key ones, because we need to work really, really closely to be a successful SDR team.
Love it. Just quickly, guys, my computer has decided it's going to be doing an update in 3 minutes, which is fantastic, and I can't turn it off. So Tamara is just going to bring her laptop in, and I'm going to jump onto another laptop on this. So it's very convenient, obviously, on a live event. In the meantime, Shabri, what's your take on that? Other departments, what have you seen really beneficial, adding to the value of the SDR onboarding process?
I love what Georgina said around RevOps, AEs, marketing. I also, think peer-to-peer learning, and Neil touched on this as well, right? So taking your top performing SDRs and looking at which of those can also own a piece of the enablement, right? So, before, when I've had people who are, fantastic at Salesforce process and things like that, I've made them the owner of, the training piece on lead to opportunity conversion and Salesforce process. So, I think in addition to other departments, leverage top performers within your team as well. And I also think it's a good opportunity to get your SDRs a mentor. And I was on a sales confidence event yesterday with where one of the speakers talked about a mentor as well. And I think that mentorship piece is key. And I've heard people before, like I've had SDR managers before say like, yeah, I mentor my reps. I'm like, no, that's your role to coach them. Like I'm talking about a mentor outside of the team. So I would say, getting some additional support there tends to have worked well for me in the past.
We can't. I don't think we can hear you, Owen. Don't worry. Shabri, I'd written that one down about mentor and actually trying to get something outside of org as well. So completely agree with the making sure you've got some time aside and encouraging, whilst not distracting, adjacent functions, so that there's that, and also direction of travel for the business, not siloed, so that there's an awareness of the bigger picture, whether that is company updates or how that works. But I agree, and it's something that sort of Owen and I have touched on a lot. If it's only on the strength of what I know and I do, then that's a pretty narrow bandwidth of imparting knowledge. There has to be some mentorship going outside of org to continue that, because ultimately it's about personal development, and development. If that's within here, that's fantastic. But if not, then it's going to be pretty difficult to move people forward beyond the best person within that business.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
So how's that for staying calm under pressure? My name has changed, but other than that, we're on a different laptop. We've made it work. It's a scary moment. Someone in the IT department is going to be having a conversation after this. I tell you, my computer decided to do a complete update. Never mind. Where are we?
We've just discussed about how to get adjacent outside of the SDR team and the sales team, how to look outside, look at external, look at, Shabri picked up on getting mentors, but not just within organization. And I think that's kind of pulling on as much. And they're the people that are truly career driven, hungry, wants to really take it to the next level, are those that look outside. So yeah, I think we just concluded. Don't worry, I don't think the swap over lasted as long as you feel it did. And
dear, we got through it. That's okay. I can't change the name though, so I'm going to take the pseudonym of Tamara for the rest of this conversation. So can we just walk through the training process? Because one of the things that I hear regularly, and Shabri, this may be interesting if you could in a minute share the metric that you shared this morning, so I don't misquote it. But one of the things I hear regularly is that onboarding process is often far too chalk and talk, far too in a meeting room. Here's a training, here's some slides, we'll walk you through that. And 2 hours in, you're starting to fall asleep. The absorption of it disappears entirely. Shabri, maybe I could start with you. What's the stat metric that you shared this morning on LinkedIn as a question number one? As a question number two, what other things can we do to make that onboarding process engaging and exciting and interesting?
Yeah, absolutely. So the metric that I shared this morning was Gartner did a study, and they said SDRs retain 15 to 20% of what they learn in onboarding. And when I first read that, actually, when I thought about it, I'm not surprised, but actually it's astonishing to think that 80 to 85% is forgotten. So in terms of what we can do, there's a really, really interesting stat that we sort of use as we build out training programs. We remember 10% of what we read, 20% of what we hear, and that jumps to 70 to 80% when it's experiential. So what do I mean by experiential? I mean, it's practical, it's social, there is exercises, there is role plays, there is workshops, there are breakout rooms, all of that sort of stuff. And you're actually giving someone an opportunity to apply practically what you have taught them from a theory. So from onboarding, I think you should be testing the entire way through. So let's say it's, a 1 week boot camp or a 2 week boot camp, you should be testing the entire way through. But one thing that I recommend to every company I talk to about onboarding is having a certification or an accreditation at the end of it. And actually we talked about day one, setting that as an expectation on day one to say, next Friday, we're going to have an accreditation that is built over a real prospect or a real client example. And here's what we're going to be looking for. And I've seen people really take this seriously, use this as an opportunity to practice everything they have learned. And I think it does two things. I think one, it consolidates everything they've learned. And two, it allows you to look at what are the ongoing coaching areas that I need to focus on as a manager going forward. So if you are doing a role play, your final assessment, and the upfront agreement is a little bit weak and their closing for commitment is a bit weak, you can take that as ongoing coaching areas and work on that beyond that initial training. So I'm a big fan, and make it objective. Don't just say, you did a good job and you did a bad job. Make it objective. So put some scoring around it. And that's what SDRs are motivated now, the competition, the element of winning, and actually make it competitive, have a prize, bring other senior stakeholders in, and create a buzz around it.
Yeah, I love that stat. That stat about it rising to 80%. It's not just a slight increase; it's a dramatic increase by making it engaging. Georgina, what do you guys do? What's worked well for you on that?
Yeah, so I think I had no idea it was so low. So I agree, that's actually quite shocking. But I think to the point of it being experiential, practical, it's really important to do that, because I think one of the most sort of dangerous things you can do during onboarding is assume that the SDRs have understood everything, because quite often you get the nods throughout, but actually have they actually understood what I'm talking about here? So one of the things that we generally like to do is ask the SDRs to do kind of presentations and present their learnings back, and that's a really great way of figuring out, have they actually understood the material here? We do role plays as well. We kind of have a role play sort of certification at the end of the 2 weeks, and that's a really great way of kind of signing off and understanding, are they ready to kind of do this, give some great feedback. And generally we do that as a group activity, so it's not the most comfortable and everyone generally hates it, but they all agree that it's a great activity to do, because we do the role plays as a group, so everybody has the kind of opportunity to listen to each other's calls and hear that feedback as well. And at the moment they're on Zoom, so they're all recorded, so they've all got the opportunity to listen back to those. And as uncomfortable as it is in the moment, it's a really valuable exercise. So yeah, that's kind of what we do. But I think the quizzes are really important throughout as well. So on kind of product knowledge and pain points and all that sort of stuff, making sure that there are quizzes throughout to test that knowledge, because it's really important to make sure that it's actually ingrained and going in really.
I love the idea of tests. I think that's so powerful, because and again, I guess this comes down to expectations, doesn't it? If you set the expectations that we're checking in, we now know it's not about testing you to see if you're doing well. It's about testing you to see what we've missed and to see where the gaps are and to see what we can do to do better. Neil, what about within Air or indeed anywhere else you've been? How have you tried to make it fun and engaging? What have you done that makes it a little bit different to the old chalk and talk?
I'm not sure whether you could ever label a lot of stuff I've done as fun. Try and do the best. I think that
don't worry, we have other people for that.
Yeah, exactly.
We have other people for that bit.
I think the bit totally covered, so I don't need to really go into too much depth, but is about doing it's the mock calls, it's the role play. If it's early, get them to call an SDR and see what it feels like, how it does. Get them to play prospect for a second, and just then you can reverse that. I think the tests and that is fantastic. What I've typically used things for is to build out and interweave a competency, sort of a little bit of a matrix, to know as you then go out of onboarding, go live, what are the bits we need to build on, out of that person. Like you said, is some people absolutely, stars from the very start, but you still have certain areas and attributes you want to develop and work on. Others are longer burners, and it's about just developing that. So I think if you're as a manager and as someone that's taking part, seeding some of that to see how we move forward once they've gone out of onboarding, how we can use that on one-to-ones, and how we can use that to really focus their development long-term, not just as part of the onboarding process.
Brilliant. I've got two more topics I want to cover in our last roughly 15 minutes, but we've got a question here from James Evans. So I'm going to put it on the screen. I'll read it out as well. Georgina, I'll get you to have a look at this first. So enjoying the call. Thanks, James. Glad you're enjoying it first and foremost. Looking at success measures and also linking to recruitment. If you want 10 on an induction, how many would you offer the job to ensure 10 turn up? That's interesting, isn't it? Whether we offer the job and people then pull out or don't turn up. It depends on what he means by turn up, of course, and what's a good poor drop-off rate after month 1 and month 3 in terms of leavers. And that's interesting. Shabri, you mentioned that earlier. Sometimes it's just not right for people. Georgina, any thoughts on those? Maybe we start with offering 10 people the job and expecting 10 to turn up. Is that naive? Should we expect a drop off at that stage?
I mean, if you set expectations properly of what to expect from the role in the interview process, then you absolutely should. I mean, you shouldn't really expect drop off before that point. I think on the point of drop off in the first few months, I think again it's all about making sure through the interview process that they really understand what the SDR role is, because I think there's this expectation a lot of the time that you're going to be speaking to loads and loads of people and you're going to be setting up loads of meetings, and it's fantastic. But obviously the reality of that role is very different in that you deal with rejection so much, and that is a part of the process. There's so many more elements to it than just booking in those meetings. So I think it's really important to understand in that process, do you understand what this role is and what are your motivations for applying for it? I think, with regards to the first few months, again, it's making sure that they feel looked after, that they feel integrated into the company, into the culture. Those are really important things, I think, for kind of minimizing that drop off. And obviously, we all want to make sure that we don't lose people in the first few months. Naturally, some people decide it's not for them. That's okay. But aside from that, we need to be doing everything we can to integrate everybody and make sure that they know exactly what is expected, of them on a kind of day-to-day basis, really.
Shabri, I'll come to you. Neil, I get the feeling we might not need your input, given Shabri's onboarded 200 people. So, Shabri, what do you see from a drop-off perspective?
I think if you've got a solid hiring and recruitment process, I think that should be quite low. Where I've seen a bit more of a drop-off is where you're hiring people straight out of education who perhaps don't quite know what the role entails. When I've done boot camps before with 20, 22 people, we've assumed 1 or 2 might not make it. And the reasons that was mutual. So, sometimes it was the fact that they found it too intense, or they found it quite tough, or the fact that, you know, actually we just didn't really think that they were the right fit for that role. And I actually think that that's why that certification and accreditation at the end is really important, and tying that back to the 9-box grid that I talked about earlier. If someone's got low performance and low potential, they just might not be a fit for your business. If someone's got low performance and high potential, I do want those people in the team. So, you know, looking at where do they fit on that grid, I think, you know, there are probably things that you can do to optimize your hiring process if that is a consistent pattern that you are seeing. But, you know, I wouldn't expect more than sort of 1 or 2 people in a group of the size I mentioned to not work out.
Yeah, it's interesting. And I think a lot of this aligns to the company's trajectory. So if I hear SDR managers and VPs who say, I've got a hiring target of 15 people because we've just had funding and we've got these big revenue goals. I'd imagine that when you're in that mode and you're in a candidate market like you are now, where the choice is not quite there and there aren't so many people, there's a level of compromise around quality. So we all think that our recruitment process will rule people out that look like this and rule people in that look like that. But if there aren't enough of those, what do? Do we compromise on the hiring goals, or do we compromise on the quality of people? And I think that, you know, those sorts of things will have a huge impact on that lever thing. And I think where I see volume of hire, organizations that are hiring more freely, let's say, and at speed, I see as many as one of three not make it through that first 3 months. Whereas if you're hiring 1 or 2 at a time, very consciously, everything's done on purpose, then I think you should have a pretty good ratio of getting through, certainly 90% plus, on getting people through that first 3-month period. Beyond that, people make decisions depending on what's right in their life. Did anyone got a different opinion to that, or a different take? Or does that fit with what you guys see and hear?
No, I think I agree with that. I was concerned because we you know, recruit quite frequently and continue to do so. I was concerned that remote would mean that there'd be less drop off. You know, if you're dialing in to Zoom or Teams, that there would be less, but we haven't found it. So either that's, you know, luck, judgment, like you said, positioning of the role. So that was a concern, but it's not one we found yet.
Okay, 2 last things, and I think we've got a few minutes to do this in, so we'll rocket through it. I want to talk about the cultural piece, because we've touched on that quite a lot, and we've talked about, you know, how do we get them on board and make the learning fun and all that kind of stuff. How do we make sure people understand our culture and get comfortable within that culture? Do we train people on our culture? Is that something we just expect to happen by osmosis and organically, or is there a purposeful way that we can give people that learning really quickly? Shabri, I'll come to you first.
It's a really, really good question. So I think that we should be bringing up culture in the hiring process. So I don't think onboarding should be the first time that they're exposed to the culture. And I think you should be interviewing for your values. Like, one of our values is always be learning. So when I've recently done, you know, interviews, that's been a massive topic that I've uncovered. I think onboarding is made up of 2 things. I think it's made up of functional and experiential. So functional is, do you have your login for SalesLoft, and, you know, do you have a Sales Navigator account, all the sort of accessy process stuff. Experiential is, how do we want our people to feel? And I think that's where culture to me comes in. So actually looking at specific things you can do on experiential. And I think it goes beyond daily stand-ups and things like that. I think it's actually just having those conversations with people of like, how are you? How have you found today? And sort of bringing that as part of your culture, and doing that as early on as possible, so people know that it's just something that happens every single day. But I think we should be starting with that in the recruitment process.
Georgina, you guys provide a service that's aligned massively towards culture. So that must be really important within Perkbox, right? That must be a focal point.
Absolutely, yeah. Culture's, culture fit is a really important one for us, and that's why it forms quite a big part of the interview process. And it goes 2 ways, right? It's not just understanding, is this person a right, they a right culture fit, but is it going to be mutual? Are they going to enjoy working at Perkbox? And that's really important. And also, you know, throughout the onboarding process, you know, we very much, like Shabri said, you know, we have questions based around our values at Perkbox, but also we try and make sure that everybody's living those values day to day. So, you know, aside from getting the new hires kind of involved in all of our team wrap-ups and kind of social activities and making them feel integrated as quickly as possible, we also we have this culture of recognition, which is really important for us, and we do that through our own platform. So in those first 2 weeks, you know, we use the Perkbox recognition platform to kind of show the new hires when they are demonstrating those attitudes and behaviors that align to our values, and that's really, really important for us to kind of get people integrated into that culture as quickly as possible.
Brilliant. Neil, anything to add on the culture piece?
No, only that sort of my big thing is we all we can do is contribute to culture, so we can control our branding, our environment, the way we manage, and the culture bit is the sum of all of our parts. So it's positioning people correct, getting the right people in, and I think that's key on recruiting and onboarding, is, you know, making sure someone has got the right, you know, or is certainly showing the right signs of the kind of style, behaviors, and sort of attributes that we're looking for. I think we can only control so much, and the rest is sort of, it's hard in business, isn't it? You want to control every single piece to make sure it all moves in the right direction in the right time. And yeah, it's making sure the team values, and I think, you know, company values that are really positioned and everyone's reminded, even if it's like the 15 to 20%, you know, if we've got the vision and the mission on the website and never actually sort of talk the talk and walk the walk, it's difficult.
All right, final question from me before we do a wrap up. On a scale of 1 to 10, with 1 being slow as a snail, take your time, get it all perfect before we start doing the job and getting in, and 10 being give them a phone on the first day and off you go, where do you think right falls for you if you were an SDR? So you and your personality, what would work best for you? Let's go round. Shabri.
6.5.
Oh, she's gone for a 0.5. How specific. Like it. Georgina?
Yeah, I was going to say a 7. Yeah, I think 7 for me. So
speed. Okay. Neil?
I've written down, I can hold it up if you want, a 7 if we're going to do Strictly Come Dancing. So that's not great, is it? That's so together, clustered.
Well, I think you'll guess that I'm probably going to be an 8 or a 9. I certainly don't believe in 10s or 1s, but what's interesting there is that you've got somebody who trains SDRs and, you know, CEO of a successful business. You've got Neil, worked in a €1 billion organization, commercial director of a growing company, and an SDR manager in a very fast growing SaaS company. And all of us want faster than slower. And maybe that's just something that people should think about, that maybe that speed of attitude and that mindset is something that's made people get to where they are. Maybe that's something we should be looking for more and more in our SDRs if we want them to go on and be hugely successful. But look, there is no right or wrong. I'm sure there are people that would disagree. I know there are people that would disagree with us on that. But interesting to see the lowest at 6.5 and the highest at, I'll say 9, I think. Let's go with 9. Or 8.5. I'll take Shabri's 8.5. I like that. Before we wrap up, Shabri, I'm conscious you've got a call in 2 minutes. Let's go with you first, and then if you want to drop off. Top takeaways from today. What are the 1, 2, or 3 things that people should take away and remember from today?
I would say test and consolidate. So remember that your onboarding is the start, not the end. And I would say evaluate and iterate. So, look at what you've done and look at how you continue to make it better. Use the data in your CRM to look at how you can improve and sort of drive productivity. And I love the question that you just asked, because I think if you asked a lot of sales leaders that, they would probably have a different answer to what they do today. So my takeaway is ask yourself that question for anyone who's listening.
Oh, I'm glad I've added something to your list. Fantastic. Thank you, Shabri. Loved having you on. If you need to drop off, by all means do it. If you can hang around, but you're welcome to. Neil, top takeaways.
Top takeaways: make the framework flexible and work for you. I think that's the one. Judge on both direction and results. So as you're onboarding, and I think the cheeky one is make sure you remember you're hiring and want an SDR, not a product consultant.
Love it. Georgina, top takeaways.
So I think for me, the key one is that expectation setting piece and how important that is in the onboarding journey and throughout. And I really like your point there, Neil, about not forgetting the why. I think so many of us do that and we jump straight into the kind of detail straight away. But I think that why is really important. And also that the statistic is really kind of shocked me. It's really low, 15 to 20%. So I think it just shows, you need to make sure that throughout that onboarding process, you are putting everything into practice and always kind of testing, quizzing, and that certification at the end, I think, is something that I'll take away as well.
Love that. I think
Shabri. Yeah, sorry, I was just going to say, Shabri's stat there should make everybody just reevaluate how we're trying to put that learning. I'm always saying, you need to reinforce all the way along. You can't just tell someone once and assume they've done it and it'll be done. But that is just breathtaking, that stat.
Agreed. I think there's 4 really quick things for me. One is the recruitment. You get it wrong in the recruitment, no onboarding process is right, and that's come up several times. That you need to be strict with what you're hiring and clear with your expectations. The second was Shabri's point around context. You've got to explain the context around why we're doing certain things in the market and that sort of stuff to help people apply their learning and absorb it in the right way. The third for me is Neil's point around the flex. So actually, this links into speed. How quickly do you want to go? Yeah, sure, you can flex on that. But also, how do you like to learn? Those sorts of things impact on how successfully people ramp. So being able to flex the model, I think, is a really, really good way of looking at it. Guys, we have to wrap up there. Brilliant conversation. Shabri's got another call to go on to, so she's dived off already. Thank you so much for joining us today, Georgina, and Shabri, who, even though she's not on the call anymore, I'll send her a note to say thank you. Thank you for joining us, Georgina. Your insight has been hugely valuable. And I hope that you've enjoyed the conversation as well. I
have, absolutely. And thank you very much for having me. Yeah, I've learned a lot today as well. So some great takeaways.
And let's give you a chance to plug Perkbox. Last chance. If people want to learn a bit more about Perkbox, what should they do?
They can go onto my LinkedIn profile and drop me a message. So if you're looking for a way to build a culture of reward and recognition, then absolutely drop me a message. One of our wonderful SDRs will be in touch with you.
And as Perkbox customers, I cannot sing its praise anymore. So there's a case study right there. Fantastic. Neil, as always, thank you for joining us. Thank you for your thoughts and insight. Georgina, been a brilliant guest today. Thank you. Shabri, even though you're not on, thank you to you as well. Your insight is always valuable in the discussions I have with you. Guys, have a good rest of the day. Thank you once again. Thank you to everybody for joining us in the audience as well. And we'll see you again next month.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Bye-bye. Cheers.